In this unit, you're going to be practicing drawing from observation. The topic of drawing from observation, the things you're going to be using are natural objects, so you'll need to have a good collection before you go in. The trick to drawing from observation, first of all, is make sure you're starting with a pencil so that you can make changes, of course. You know, as you're working, you'll find things that you need to change. When you're done with your pencil, if you want to trace over them in your sketchbook with Sharpie, that will be probably a good idea. I'm going to start with Sharpie, or if you don't have Sharpie, you could also use just a darker color pencil, black color pencil, or a black pen or something. All right, fine line Sharpie. So I'm going to work with this instead. As you're working, the biggest tip that I can give you to draw from observation is to look at your object lots of times. Don't just look at it once and assume that you have it memorized. Every section that you draw, really study it first and make sure you know what that line looks like. Look at your object and try to find, things that you could use to help you draw it. Like looking at how this part of the leaf, for example, is lower than this part of the leaf. Like the way that the sides go, of course, it's missing this big chunk, but they aren't across from each other. It's more like a diagonal pattern. So paying attention to things like that, paying attention to the fact that these aren't triangular points. They kind of come to a curve and then out to a point. So just really focusing on those things. Looking for the imperfections in your items. So like right here, this doesn't even come all the way back down. This leaf is broken off right here. Finding things like that will make your project more interesting. The other thing you really need to do is draw these things large. I'm going to start drawing while I'm talking. You don't want these things to be small because in the end, the paper that you're going to be working from is fairly sizable. These drawings you'll be doing in your sketchbook, and then once you're done in your sketchbook and you're ready to move on to the next step, we'll transfer the drawings out of your sketchbooks and onto that really big final paper. So as I'm drawing, I am just constantly looking back and forth between my object and my paper. It looks like I'm continually drawing to you guys, but if you could see my eyes, the whole time my eyes are just switching back and forth between this leaf object that I'm looking at and my actual drawing. I've got it, them right next to each other so that as I'm working, I can quickly look back and forth between the two things and make sure I'm getting as much detail as possible from my leaf. Okay, I'm going to add in, I'm looking at this leaf upside down also because I think that's sort of helpful for finding some detail in the leaf. So that way I can see all the veining. I'm never relying on my memory of what the leaf looks like or my assumption of what the leaf looks like. I'm constantly looking to see what it actually looks like. Drawing from your imagination or your memory is a fantastic thing to do. It's a great way to practice getting better at drawing and to just test out some creative thoughts that you might have. But if you're really wanting to look to improve your skill at just drawing from observation is a fantastic thing to do that with. All right, so I'm just about done drawing this leaf and adding this detail in. You've maybe noticed that I'm drawing it much, much larger than it actually is. Like here's the original size, and then here's the actual leaf size. That's really important. As you're working through and drawing these on computer paper, or if you're drawing them in your sketchbook, you need them to be big. You don't want any of your drawings to be teeny tiny. So for example, like when I get over to drawing this acorn, I'm not going to draw it at the size that it is. I'm going to really make it a lot bigger. You'll struggle with this project later if you don't make these things fairly sizable. So as you're working, just make sure you're constantly pushing yourself to do that. You're constantly pushing yourself to draw things as just bigger than they actually are, taking up some pretty good space on your paper. And then in as much detail as possible. Things like little marks on your objects, or if your leaf has a little hole in it. Those are great things to include right now, so that you've got that information to look back at later. We won't bother with keeping the actual leaves themselves and natural objects. Once you're done drawing, you can get rid of those. So that's why it's important to gather as much information as possible as you're actually drawing the leaf into your sketchbook or onto your paper. All right. So I have my drawings here completed. I did want to point out a couple things. You may, like this, I was talked about enlarging things. This stick, I actually had to make it smaller so that it would fit on my paper. So if you need to do something like that, that's fine too, you know, to make it fit. You probably want to avoid having your objects overlap each other because we're going to need to use them all, you know, separately later. I wanted to point out on this leaf, I started kind of slipping back into drawing from memory and made a mistake in the veining and had to go back and fix it. I had the veining coming from up here, and really it all kind of came from a central point closer down to the stem. So it really is important to just constantly check. Don't rely on, you know, thinking that your eyes have absorbed as all the information that is available to you. Even though I had been looking at this leaf several times, you know, I still hadn't gotten that detail until I actually drew it, and then I ended up drawing it incorrectly. So make sure you're paying attention. You're going to really need for these objects to have strong contour lines. Your contour lines are the lines that are to the outside, like anything that's touching negative space. We're going to use those contour lines to begin with only for the next step in our project. So feel like anywhere there's a hole where the outer edge of your object is touching the negative space behind it, really make sure you've got those lines good and strong. If it's helpful to outline those contour lines with a Sharpie, you can do that. You can leave them as is also. And the other thing is, don't draw anything on the back of your papers. We're going to need them to only just be on the front. Some of you may end up cutting these up later, and some of you may end up being able to use a different method of transfer, but it's really important that your drawings are only on one side of your paper, not on two sides. That will really mess you up later if you draw on both sides of your paper. So stick to one side. If you're in your sketchbook, use, you know, just one side of your sheets, and then go ahead and turn to the next page, and don't draw anything on the back. And then once you've got your drawings, I would say, like, let's see. Oh, and if you mess up on one, like I messed up on this one, I just crossed it off and moved on. That's fine. You know, for now, these are just on computer paper or sketchbook paper, so it's not a big deal if you mess up. These aren't your final drawings. This is your information gathering. All right, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I've got 7 drawings to work with. That's about right for the size of paper that you guys are going to end up on. Make sure you're drawing large, and that you've got several drawings to work with, I would say a minimum of 7.